Hello and welcome to My Trans Best Friend, a cozy talk show with me, your trans best friend Lily. We're here to talk about a whole bunch of stuff. Today specifically, we're talking about a very, very specific topic. But before we get into that, I want to tell you that this show is brought to you by Lily's Lovelies. These are Patreon supporters like Dakota and Caitlin, whose support keeps the light on and the rent paid. Lily's Lovelies on Patreon get these episodes and other episodes like the spicy stuff a whole week early. And you get a video version of the podcast, usually, although today there is no video version. You can join the Lovelies at patreon.com/LILLYTINO for just $5 a month. But before we make you wait any longer for, as far as I'm concerned, the most excited, and this is no disrespect to any guests we've had on this pod before, because I have so many incredible people in my life that have been on this pod. My own mother has been on the podcast, my best friend. Last week, the voice of the MTA was on the podcast, which was crazy. But y'all, this is I've never quite been starstruck before by anyone on this pod, so it is a first. A little bit of context before I bring him all the way in, but there, how do we even start to explain this? Basically, years ago, I found a podcast called My Brother, and Me, and I started following this podcast and these three brothers that did this podcast. Now, none of those brothers are on the show today, but it's an important explanation on how I found Dan. So as the years went on, one of the hosts in particular was began to be very vocal about his love of cereal. And I resonated with that because I also love cereal. And it just kind of followed that he would make a podcast, and he did, called The Empty Bowl, which, if you haven't listened to it, I give you full permission to stop this podcast and go listen to every single episode. They are meditative episodes, it's a meditative podcast about cereal, with one of the guys from My Brother and Me, and our guest. And the one thing that really is the secret sauce to the show, other than the fact that it literally is a meditation, like they have ocean sounds in the background, is that the one half of the podcast is, I think, the world's foremost expert on cereal, or at least if there is, and maybe you agree with that, maybe you don't, but it is, I don't know of anyone who knows more about cereal and is more keyed into the cereal world than our guest today. His name is Dan Goubert. Welcome, Dan.
Hi, thank you for having me. I certainly don't know if I would call myself the most knowledgeable cereal expert there is. I definitely specialize in recent and upcoming cereal as well. There are a lot of great cereal historians out there who will be able to give you many more, jewels of stories of the centuries-old history of the stuff. But I tend to focus on the here, the now, the upcoming, and, well, I guess any cereals that came out in the past 10-ish years or so, which is how long I've been quasi-journalistically covering the topic.
Right. And that is something that, I think on the show, you are this endless source of knowledge and anecdotes about cereal, but I don't know if you've ever spoken much to how did you get, where did your love of cereal come from, and how did then that translate into being a cereal journalist?
Well, I mean, my love for cereal is probably pretty similar to how a lot of people fondly remember eating cereal on a Saturday morning and watching cartoons or whatever, and basically just, there's a lot of sweet, nostalgic, escapist type foods that we remember fondly from our past, but cereal seems to be the only one that has limitless variety where there's always new cereals coming out, and B, there's an actual mythos to it where there's all these characters and ongoing lore within the cereal worlds and activities on the box, all of this that makes it a much more engaging food stuff overall. And I've always been kind of interested in snack food culture, I guess if you can call it that. But as I was like approaching graduating high school and knowing that I wanted to work in, something that involved writing, because that was kind of my primary skill set, I also knew that, excuse me, I also knew that, in order to really get into a writing-based field, you need to have both a specialty and like a niche, but also like prove that you have done something creative writing involved for yourself, by yourself, rather than just trying to get a job off of it. So I had been like, in high school, I would just like skip out of class basically to sit in the bathroom and like read junk food review sites, because I found it oddly compelling that people would use such floral language to describe like a cheeseburger.
So these junk food websites were, I would imagine, I don't know how old you are, but I would imagine like earlier days of the internet, kind of like forums, or were they actually dedicated junk food websites?
Oh no, it was websites that were still regularly posting stuff, and many of which still are posting stuff to this day, including the impulsivebuy.com, which is like, one of the greatest of all time and most dedicated in that sphere. And I started doing like guest posts for that site, and then eventually decided I wanted to spin off and do my own thing. And I definitely did not have the bandwidth to cover the entire fast food genre. So I decided to hyper specialize into something that I saw as like a very underexplored niche at the time, which was cereal. And there have been a lot of other cereal based, websites, Instagram accounts and stuff like that since. But I like to think that if I may be hubristic in one way, say that I led that new wave of cereal coverage by starting my blog serialistly.net in 2015. And then, we spun off into the Empty Bowl after Justin, who was a fan of my blog, reached out to me about starting this show.
So now that the Empty Bowl exists, and, I would use myself as an example as, before the Empty Bowl came out, I would have described myself as a cereal appreciator, but seeing and hearing both of your passions for cereal kind of helped me discover something about how I felt. Does that make sense? Like something within myself about my relationship to cereal, right? Like that it is such a big thing and so many people eat it every single day. Why are we not thinking or talking about it more? There is, like you said, there's so much to it. But would you, is this something that you see a lot of? Like how has Seriously and your day-to-day changed since the Empty Bowl?
In what way?
Like, do you find that the podcast is, or I guess anything that you're doing, helping expand the serial news and review following demographic, right? Like, is that expanding? Is the audience for this kind of thing expanding? Are people appreciating it more as time goes on?
Yeah, I definitely think that partnering up with Justin, who, obviously through his and his brother's extensive podcast empire, have a far bigger following than I ever had with just my blog alone. And I would say that my blog definitely, catered to those existing cereal freaks, complimentary freaks is what I'm saying. But people who like already cared enough about cereal to want to follow and see what new stuff is coming out and, get like connections to previous cereals and cereal history and stuff like that. But, the McElroy fan base is far broader in its interests since, the main My Brother and Me podcast is kind of, a variety show in all topics. So it's not like as hyper fixated on one topic as our show is. So I definitely think that between the blog and the Empty Bowl, I'm definitely talking to two very different audiences. And I think that's kind of why, as time has gone on, I'm not giving up the blogging aspect of it, but, on one hand, as my adult life gets ever busier, it's harder to write 700 words about a cereal versus talking about it for a few minutes. But also I'm finding that I enjoy I just enjoy doing the podcasting more because I feel like I'm less of a mouthpiece for like the cereal corporations, where like on the blog I'm kind of just putting out creative PR press releases or whatever for their new stuff, versus on the show, it kind of is having a demonstrable impact in, we didn't really expect this, but getting the response that people use our show to fall asleep is now like the biggest feedback we get by far. And hearing a lot of the testimonials and kind things that people say about the show helping them sleep during difficult times in their life, or like it helping with some sleeping problems that they may have been having, is a really, really great feeling for me. Because, like I was saying, as I get older and I start to realize like the dark side and crass consumerism that goes into big corporations and producing cereal and stuff like that, I didn't want to just be like a free advertising shill, so to speak, for these corporations.
Right.
I wanted to be able to recontextualize this thing that I love but might have like mixed feelings about in terms of an ethical standpoint, and like retranslate that love into something that is more constructive and helping people sleep, and helping calm them down makes me feel a lot better.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can definitely say, that anytime I get a new episode of The Empty Bowl, it's like, oh, my sleep is going to be just a little bit easier tonight because I can put it on. And sometimes if I'm just going through my podcast queue, it'll be daytime, quote unquote, podcast. And then maybe The Empty Bowl will happen to be in the queue, and I'll be like, no. This is for evening. This is evening pod. So
I love that.
Yeah. But anyways, so I had an idea, and you mentioned it, that this was something you get a lot, but from someone who is so knowledgeable and also so well-spoken about cereals, I was curious what your favorite all-time cereals are, because we, a lot of times on this pod, will go through our favorite foods in one way or another. And I think it made sense for you, of course, to talk about cereal. So I'm here to listen. I have a couple of novel cereal ideas at some point that I might throw in here, but feel free to just like hit me with these, and I will ask questions, and we can just get deep into it.
Well, what's your favorite cereal? So I have an idea of whose taste I'm talking to here.
Hey, that's good. Cater to the...
Not that I'm going to change what I say at all, I promise.
Okay. Well, okay. It's funny. One of the first episodes I ever did of this podcast was me solo talking about cereal, mostly inspired by The Empty Bowl. But I think my all-time favorite cereal would be the peanut butter Kashi Go Crunch. I think that's what you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, it's a really good one, actually. I've been getting more into that one over time.
Yeah, it's a standby because I don't know. The way my ADHD kind of works is I will pick a breakfast food and then stick with it for a year and a half until I'm ready to move on, and I won't deviate from it. And Kashi was one of those. So what I would do is I would take the Kashi, I would pour, I'm a 2% milk person, and then I would also mix in vanilla protein powder because I had just usually work out in the mornings and I need protein to replenish my protein supply or whatever. And that mix of and I think it was vanilla ice cream protein powder. So it wasn't like gross tasting. It just kind of made the milk a little bit thicker. So that complemented the peanut butter really well. And I would always let it sit just for 5-10 minutes to let it get a little bit soaked up, the milk a little bit soaked up, so it wasn't super crunchy. And that would be my breakfast every day for, I think, a couple of years. Other than that, I really enjoy a Raisin Bran. I enjoy Raisin Bran. I enjoy Corn Pops. I think those are did those get discontinued?
No, I kind of got suckered in by a fake rumor that they had been, and then to the point where Kellogg's addressed it outright that they weren't discontinuing it. So that was kind of a shameful moment for me recently, where I believed some fake news for a minute.
Hey, look, with the cereal world being as niche as it is, it's one thing if it's like a super mainstream thing and you get it wrong, like come on. Someone was saying you were wrong somewhere, but not everyone was talking about the corn pops. I think that's a reasonable faux pas to make. But yeah, so those are that's kind of my cereal palette. Does that paint a picture for you?
I believe so. I appreciate a fellow Raisin Bran fan, because a lot of people don't seem to like it. And there is a Raisin Bran in my top 5 cereals list. So,
ooh. Well, one thing I will say for Raisin Bran is that I worked at a summer camp for many years, and Raisin Bran was one of the options every morning. And for when you're at a place where fiber is not necessarily a super available thing, Raisin Bran is gonna get the job done, and I needed it right then and there. But the other cereal that I will say, and maybe you've had this, and I'm sitting on, it's not quite as novel as I think, but I really love if you take a whole sleeve of graham crackers and just kind of karate chop it down the middle, pour some milk on. It's honestly closer to a soup than it is to a cereal, but it is incredible.
Yeah, I like to do that with Teddy Grahams. They hold up a little bit better.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to try that one soon. Yeah. But yeah, feel free to jump in. I think maybe 5 first, and then we can work our way up to 1.
Yeah, so like I said, that's a question that I get asked a lot, to the point where like I put a little graphic of my top 5 cereals on my blog's about page. But now that I look at it, I don't necessarily 100% agree with it anymore. So there are a few adjustments that I'll make to it for anyone who for some reason has looked at it before and is anticipating that I will say exactly that.
They're ready. They've got their finger on the send button, ready to correct you about it.
So number 5, I would say, would be Cheerios Oat Crunch, the Honey and Oats variety. So anyone who listens to the Empty Bowl podcast will not be surprised to hear that there's an Oat Crunch Cheerios on this list, because it's like the cereal line that Justin and I constantly are hyping up as like the best in the modern cereal game. It's like all Cheerios are good. Like Cheerios as a cohesive brand tend to be like top tier cereals, just because they have that really good toasted oat base that plays so well with any other flavor that you might put on top of it. But the Oat Crunch line kind of goes a step further by like galvanizing their Cheerios, essentially making them thicker, crunchier, and then putting a bunch of like loose oats in there as well to make it like a real dense, rich, and multi-textural experience, which I love a good multi-textural cereal. And so basically, more or less every Cheerios Oat Crunch that has come out has been amazing. They started with cinnamon, which is really good. Then they did this honey and oats one, which I'll come back to. And there was also almond, which is also pretty good. And the most recent berry one, was just all right. Kind of their closest thing to a misstep, but still better than most new cereals that come out. It's the honey and oats, though, that it just feels like they nailed it so hard and blew every other honey cereal out of the water. It's like if Honey Nut Cheerios was, digivolved or something into some crazier, more, I don't know, insane form of itself. But it's so good. And, it's one of the ones on this list. One of only, how many am I going to say is on this list are still available? Yeah, one of only 2 that are still available on this list, because I like to talk about, well, it's more complicated, but I'll get to it.
Okay.
But Cheerios Honey and Oats Oat Crunch is one that you can just kind of go to any major store out there right now, find, and just be delighted. So if you need any easy cereal recommendations, I'd say that I've never met anyone who didn't like Cheerios Oat Crunch Honey and Oats. It's universally belovable.
Would you compare this, because I know I was on stream the other day talking about the fact that you're coming on, and a lot of people started mentioning Honey Bunches of Oats as their favorite cereal. Would you say this is akin to that?
It's definitely similar. I do love Honey Bunches of Oats. I would say like coming in at 6 or 7 on my personal list would be the Cinnamon Honey Bunches of Oats specifically, which I feel like is the best cinnamon cereal, even better than Cinnamon Toast Crunch, which might sound, heathenistic to say, but I will say it with confidence. But I do love Honey Bunches of Oats. I think, again, a very good multi-textural experience. The Cheerios Oat Crunch is just a bit like, denser and heartier about it with a better crunch. So just narrowly edges it out.
Gotcha. And I'm looking at a picture of it right here. I understand what you mean about, because I don't think I've ever had this cereal, and I'm going to have to go down to Safeway tonight and grab some. But so you mentioned these Cheerios themselves, like structurally, they are different from regular Cheerios. Is the formula, is the recipe different, or are they coated in something? Like how are they different?
Yeah, they're pretty similar. I mean, some of this might be subjective to say because it's taken within like the entire context of the whole cereal, but they seem to be more toasted a little bit, as well as like kind of coated as well. I can't really say whether they're not like fully glazed, but they definitely have more of a stickiness to them.
Okay. And
like a layer of flavor on top.
Gotcha. And I'm seeing, maybe this is just like a discrepancy in the coating, but in the close-up picture, I see ones that are Cheerios that are kind of lighter, but then also darker Cheerios. Is that because they're like varying degrees of toasted, or is that just the lighting?
Yeah, I think there are different degrees of caramelization to the different ones, which, gives it a bit more of that caramelized flavor.
Gotcha. And you mentioned the flour is oat flour. Could you make, for any of my listeners who are not as in the know in cereal, could you give like a quick rundown of like the different cereal flours and how that's kind of where the state of it in today's cereal world?
Yeah, I mean, for the overwhelming most part, you're going to find cereals that are corn flour based, which there's a time and a place for corn bases in cereal. And for me personally, I only really like it when a cereal's being upfront that it is a corn based cereal. So like a corn pop or a corn flake, I'm totally down with. But like when you take a corn base and you try to add another flavor on top of it, they end up kind of end up in conflict where you're kind of tasting the corn, not really gelling very well with like a fruit flavor or whatever that you put on top of it. Mm-hmm. And add to it that like corn-based cereals are so light and airy. And as I'm already kind of making clear, I love really dense cereals. So corn is very rarely for me, and like it seems to be an epidemic where, presumably because corn flour is more affordable than others, that like either cereals that were previously made with other flours are now being changed into corn-based cereals, or just like every new cereal seems to be corn-based, and that no one's really taking the time to make something that is better quality. And then you also have like wheat flours and rice flours as well, which are very often blended together. And then there's oat flour as well, which, it's very rare to find like only oat-based cereals outside of Cheerios. Usually you're either getting just corn or like a mix of some of the other three together.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense because, corn is everywhere. Corn is everything. It's in every food you can possibly imagine, and that, of course, makes sense. It would be Cheerios. So when you talk about the dense cereals, my mind, of course, goes to the extreme, which is grape nuts. Do you have opinions on grape nuts?
I like grape nuts. I don't think they're as bad as a lot of people say that they are. It's just not a cereal that I get particularly often. It doesn't have enough of like a bold flavor profile for me. I mean, I like some blander cereals as well, but for me, the effort versus reward of crunching through these painfully heavy grape nuts is not always worth it for me.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for that. That makes sense. I appreciate the oat flour explanation. I, too, love a dense, hearty cereal. Shall we get into number? Is there anything else you want to say about the Cheerios, or do you want to move on?
We can keep going.
Okay.
So for number 4, I would have to give it to Neopet's Island Berry Crunch, a cereal that is very much not existent anymore, and hasn't for something like 18 years now, I would say.
Neopet's Island Berry Crunch? Oh my God, that's incredible. I didn't know that existed. Go on. Tell me about it.
It was just another out of a long line of like early 2000s licensed cereals that they don't always put a lot of effort into. But I was such a huge Neopets kid. I would play all the time after school and like draw the ire of my parents for hogging all the bandwidth on the family computer to play Neopets, etc. So naturally, I gravitated instantly to this Neopets-based cereal, and I admit more so than most cereals that I talk about, I am probably wearing rose-tinted glasses, and the cereal was not probably as good as I remember it being, but it had a really unique mixed berry profile that I haven't really seen replicated ever since or tried again. So a lot of like the licensed cereals you see today, they'll be quote unquote fruity flavored and they'll all just taste literally the same, like some ambiguous Fruit Loops or Trix type clone. But the Island Berry Crunch had this really, really, arcanely specific flavor profile that I miss really bad. And like years later, my friend Gabe from Cereal Time, a YouTube series about cereal, he sent me a sealed box of the stuff, and I reviewed it like a decade past its expiration date. And of course, it tasted horribly nasty. But
Yeah.
I don't know. To me, this cereal encapsulates like my childhood experience with cereal within one cereal. So I got to give it a nod on the list here for all it has done to contribute to who I am today.
Oh my God, that's incredible. I don't know if we were comparable in level of Neopets. I don't know how hardcore you were, but I played a heck of a lot of Neopets.
I played a lot, but I was also a dumb little child, so I didn't like have a lot. I wasn't like good at Neopets.
You weren't min-maxing your Neopets.
No.
Okay. Were you into the Neopet games much, or was there any particular thing on Neopets that you like to do?
I definitely like the games. Definitely Ice Cream Machine.
Of course,
was my favorite.
It's one of the best
I liked
ones.
Feed Florg as well.
Mm-hmm.
I liked it.
There's the one with like it was like a blaster game where you're in space and you're shooting fluffy little like poof ball thingies and they get harder and stuff.
Yeah, I don't remember what that one was called. Yeah. There are a lot of good ones. I also liked the Neopets board game a lot, which I still play with friends to this day.
Was it like aimed for kids, or was it more of a board game for board game nerds?
No, it was definitely a kid's game, and I've had it since I was a kid and still played it, but it's kind of like a Mario Party type board game where it's pretty timeless in its mechanics, and people love to be surprised by how good a Neopets board game can be.
Yeah. Interesting. I would... you're giving me so many things to Google. I'm sure I'll Google it at some point, but... Yeah, I don't know. I really... Neopets was kind of a free-to-play mobile game before free-to-play mobile games were a thing. But it seemed so innocent at the time of come back every day and spin these 3 different wheels and like you might get something or you might not. And, grind out these points to get cosmetics for these Neopets. And I don't know. It's just I would imagine that if you were also into Neopets, that we were about the same age, just sitting at the computer with a bowl of cereal. I would imagine spinning the Neopets wheel every day. It was comforting. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Island Berry Crunch. What about number 3?
So number 3, I will have to give to South Korean Oreo O's, which for the longest time was what I would say was my number 1 cereal, if someone asked me.
Okay.
So most people know about Oreo O's, but there was and now you can still get them today or whatever, but there was a long, interesting history with the mixed ownership of the Oreo O's trademark, where the cereal originally came out in the U.S. in the 90s and was discontinued after a while, but it actually never... I think it was discontinued for, the better part of a decade, maybe 2. But it never got discontinued in South Korea specifically, where the Oreo O's brand was held by a different company who still had the rights to produce it independently. And so... when I learned about this, I immediately wanted to import a box and try it myself, and I did that off of eBay or something, and come to find out that South Korean Oreo O's are made totally differently than the US ones, and they are infinitely better.
Hmm.
They are way, again, denser and like more authentically chocolatey, and they have better quality marshmallows. And I don't know. I don't know why they did it so differently or like what precisely makes them so much better than the US ones, but like they really are. They just taste more like actual little Oreo cookies than a cereal adaptation of Oreo the cookie.
Right.
And it is pretty expensive still to import boxes of this stuff, and I think because I haven't had it in a while is why it has fallen a couple places on my personal rankings, but I have to acknowledge that it's just so great. It's on a level that not really any US cereal will even try in terms of like formulaic complexity
Right.
and indulgence.
Maybe that's just the American thing of it needs to be mass producible. It needs to be like likable enough, but not so specific that like it could turn anyone off. But I don't know.
I mean,
It,
if I
it
had to like
mhm.
hypothesize, it seems like obviously American cereal consumers want to make, or sorry, scrap that. Obviously, American cereal companies want to make as much money as they can. And I'm not saying
Mhm.
that South Korean cereal producers would be any different,
Right.
but I think that more so than in the U.S., cereal is seen as like more of like a compact dessert rather than something that you need a vast quantity of to get a giant breakfast-sized bowl for your whole family every single day.
Mm.
So, like the South Korean Oreo O's could definitely come in a smaller box, and I think because they are producing less cereal, they can put the same amount of flavor into a smaller amount that would be spread across an entire family-sized box in America.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Like the use case for cereal, culturally, cereal sounds like it's just different. Because yeah, it is a weird state of things where cereal is mostly just a cross marketing opportunity at this point for most American brands. But
Mm-hmm.
there are like those Cheerios and here the Oat Crunch and the other cereals I'm sure on your list that do seem to be taking a bit more pride in a quality product. But it kind of sparked something in me while you were talking. You have these Neopets Island Berry Crunch that, in theory, were incredible back in the day, and then these upgraded Oreo O's. And I do remember Oreo O's being kind of gross, at least the American ones. Just like, this doesn't taste like Oreos. Why am I eating this? Um, it seems like there's room for a more niche or a series of niche cereal companies to come in and take more pride in their cereals. And maybe I just haven't heard of them. I know there's Magic Spoon, but Magic Spoon's getting bigger. And, I think they're kind of a little bit more focused on more like keto or low carb cereal. Is this a thing that I've missed out on, or is this void not being filled?
There's definitely a lot of up and coming indie cereal brands, but you're right that almost all of them will exclusively focus on making like healthier cereals for adults, so to speak. And a lot of them are seeing for adults as meaning like your body's getting old and can't handle sugar, so we're going to make something that is more mature tasting, so to speak.
Yeah.
And there's not really many that are going for the pure decadence route. And I
Right.
feel like if you were to see something like that, it usually comes in the form more of like a granola or something that can still be promoted as being on the go, or like a yogurt mix in or something like that. And I think the
Yeah.
thing with like there being more granolas also speaks to the fact that like making cereal on a large scale is incredibly hard because you need all this industrial machinery that can make these consistent loops and shapes and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I would presume that granola being just, these craggly mix-ups of oats and stuff like that is easier to keep quality control on,
That's
because like
true.
there's a lot of overhead I'm sure that involved in making uniform cereal shapes. But the closest thing I can think of to what you're describing would be like a grocery chain like HEB, which we talk about on the show pretty often, where a lot of the times with store brand cereals, like at a Kroger or a Walmart or something like that, they're probably like co-packaging with major cereal companies where they're still using the same machinery or something like that and just putting it in their own brand boxes. But HEB, which is a Texas-based supermarket chain, has these crazy, like, artisan cereals, basically. Their cerealology line is what it's called.
Okay.
And they're just so... They're definitely more adult, where it's these mixes of, like, strawberry and matcha cereal, or, like, a spicy espresso cereal, or my favorite one is their Morning Sunshine, which just has, like, a whole bunch of different, like, real fruits in it, and also, like, yogurt bits in it too, and it all just comes together into a really, really refreshingly, again, mature flavor palette, but in a way that is, more flavorful than a Magic Spoon, for sure. Not trying to, position itself as being healthy or whatever, and more just being like, this is a treat that is not going to taste as processed as a kid's cereal.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's the angle that sounds like HEB is the only one doing anything about, because if I saw something like that, and I guess maybe even more locally, if there was a brick and mortar location, almost like, what if a pizza joint but for cereal? You walk in and it's like, oh yeah, the special today, we made these like actual little tiny mini Oreos, and maybe they're warm as they pour them into the bowl, and you can partner with local milk. I know I'm just like blue skying it here, but it seems like there's a market, and there's cereal restaurants out there somewhere, right? Aren't there places that do stuff like that, or at least where they just have like large collections of cereals?
Yeah, cereal bars or cafes, whatever you would call them, they were definitely a trend for a while. I don't hear as much about new ones opening up. I don't know, it's a bit harder, it seems, for small businesses to catch on in most major cities in today's economy. And I can imagine that, I mean, your idea is great, and I would love to go to a place like that, but I do wonder whether it's still, like, way too specific of an audience for something that, like, sure, someone might come in and try it, but are they going to come back? Or are they going to be like, oh, I did the cereal cafe thing, I'm good?
Yeah,
so
it's a good point.
I don't know. I think it might be a bit risky for a lot of business owners to try and hyperfixate the way that we're talking about cereal right now.
It's true. I mean, I totally agree with you. It would be really tough, and I think the marketing is probably what would make or break it. Like, you'd have to really, really figure out the angle that was going to work. But as someone who eats at restaurants almost daily and streams, and visually interesting food is like the name of the game, God, that would be so cool. Just go in and eat like 10 bowls of cereal in a sitting, or, do a flight of cereal tasting. Like, it just sounds so relaxing and good. Anyways, what was that, number 3? Do you want to hit me with number 2? Or was that number 3?
That was number 3, yeah.
Okay.
So number 2 would be the other cereal on this list that you can still go out and buy today if you have a Trader Joe's near you. And this is Trader Joe's Raisin Bran Clusters.
Okay.
So if you are a Raisin Bran fan, you got to hop on this one immediately. I love Raisin Bran Crunch from Kellogg's. Not a big fan of plain Raisin Bran from Kellogg's. The Raisin Bran Crunch, in my opinion, is so much better that it's not even a competition. But that's beside the point, because to the same degree that Raisin Bran Crunch is better than Raisin Bran, Trader Joe's Raisin Bran Clusters are better than Raisin Bran Crunch. This is another cereal that it's not afraid to deviate from the standard conception of how dense a cereal should be. This is a heavy cereal. Like Raisin Bran Crunch, you'll get a few granola clusters in there, but Raisin Bran Clusters is like a perfect, 33 to 33 to 33 point whatever ratio of flakes to raisins to giant oat clusters. And these things are just so crunchy. Like if a whole bunch of grape nuts came together to make one grape boulder. And it's just such a great multi-textural experience, like I was saying, where you have these crisp flakes, these uber crunchy clusters, and then these chewy raisins give you like the full sensory mouthfeel experience. And I would say you definitely have to like Raisin Bran to love this cereal, but if you are a Raisin Bran fan, then this one like changes the very boundaries of the genre.
Wow. Okay. Well, I was not aware of this cereal. Maybe when you've talked about it on the podcast, I was already asleep. But it looks incredible just from the Google images. So you mentioned the Raisin Bran itself, the bran, like the flakes, as crispy, which it struck a chord with me because when I think of Raisin Bran, and honestly when I think of most cereal, I almost always prefer it soggy. Are you a pour the milk and crunch in immediately, or is there like a little bit of sogginess that you like? Where do you fall on that?
Well, again, to use the word multitextural so many times in this podcast, but I like to add the multitexturalism to the sogginess of the cereal as well. So I'll find that I use probably a little less milk in every bowl of cereal than most people do. So I'm only like the bottom half to a third of the cereal is ever really steeping in the milk at all. So I get through the top of it and it's still very crunchy. And then as I work down deeper, it gets a little softer and softer. So I, again, get that full continuum of mushiness to crunchiness, I guess.
That makes sense. Yeah, for me, it's the cereal has got to be buoyant. I have to see the top of it kind of float up a little bit before I'm done pouring. But different strokes for different floats for different folks, I suppose. Okay, so and one other question I have about Raisin Bran. I heard on a YouTube show recently that Raisin Bran is made by almost all of the major cereal producers. Is that true, or is there one major Raisin Bran and then everyone else is kind of trying to play catch up?
Yeah, Kellogg's Raisin Bran and Raisin Bran Crunch is far and away the most popular Raisin Bran out there, but Post does one as well. I mean, General Mills has done Raisin Brans in the past. They do things like Basic 4, which is kind of like a Raisin Bran, but honestly, no one really comes close to Kellogg's dominance over the Raisin Bran market, and I don't think anyone's too eager to try and challenge them, except for Trader Joe's, I guess, who are content to let this hidden gem stay on shelves, even if it's not getting a lot of fanfare.
Yeah, Trader Joe's is good at that. Oh my, yes, brand fare. I love a bit of brand fare in my morning cereal. Yeah, it's just so interesting that in any other type of food or any other category of food, if one food is named X, then no other food is allowed to be called X, right? I guess it's just not like if there's one Raisin Bran, how could there then be multiple other competing Raisin Brans? Is it because the name is just so literal that it's bran plus raisins that it can't be trademarked?
Yeah, I would imagine it's similar with like your corn flakes and stuff like that. I think where you start to toe the line is with like Frosted Flakes. I don't think a lot of other companies are out calling their stuff Frosted Flakes, but I don't know if that would hold up to legal scrutiny. I'm not gonna pretend I'm an expert on the matter, but yeah, I think a Raisin Bran is a type of food stuff so generalized that they can't trademark it, but capital Raisin, capital Bran as a Kellogg's product is pretty well known.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. I guess it's the same for cheeseburger. It's not like that's trademarked, but I don't know. It's interesting because I think of Raisin Bran as one thing, but it technically does exist elsewhere. Yeah. But whenever I sit down with a bowl of Raisin Bran, I just get taken right back to 7 a.m. summer camp, thinking, "Thank God for this fiber." All right, I am so excited for number one because you said it does not exist currently.
It does not, but
Okay.
the reason it's top of mind, and I think the reason that it has leapt from the previous number 5 on my list to the number 1 is because just today there was finally a spiritual successor announced. So this is from 2017, Captain Crunch's Orange Cream Pop Crunch. And I'm a big fan of Captain Crunch as a family of cereals. I think he has the best lore and history of any cereal mascot, as well as extended cast of characters. But he also just he rarely releases a really bad cereal. Some of them will just be okay, but between just like the original Cap'n Crunch flavor and the original Crunch Berries flavor, it's just so iconic, I guess. And I guess that relates to Orange Cream Pop Crunch because it's basically just the normal Cap'n Crunch like treasure chest pieces, very coconut oily pieces, but with this vanilla orange flavor infused into it. And there's been orange cereals in the extended history of cereal between like your OJ's cereal and your Quangaroos, which are long gone, even way before my time. I never got to try those ones. So Cap'n Crunch's Orange Cream Pop Crunch was my first ever exposure to like a creamy orange cereal. Like besides Trix, there's not much representation for citrusy flavors in the cereal aisle, much less a sweet citrusy one. Like this Orange Cream Pop Crunch, and it was like blink and you miss it in terms of availability. It was almost, I think it was like a regionally exclusive sort of thing where I posted a glowing 10 out of 10 review of this stuff, and most people never were even able to find it where they lived. So I was very lucky to even try this cereal at all, and I think I only ever ate one box of it, but the memory has been deeply impactful on me, and it was just so good. There's not much more to say about it besides that.
Are you a fan of the orange Julius or like the the creamsicle flavor otherwise, or was it just the synergy of it with Captain Crunch that made it so special?
I definitely love the flavor profile. I love cream savers, especially.
Cream savers. Those were the best.
But I do think it was the sheer unique novelty of it, where I had never tasted a cereal like this before, and it just opened up a whole new door for me in terms of what a cereal could be. And then we hadn't gotten any orange creamsicle cereals since, until just today. Malto Meal announced that they'd be launching 3 new cereals for this summer: a strawberry shortcake one, a key lime pie one, as well as an orange dreamsicle cereal, which appears to be keeping the Orange Cream Pop Crunch dream alive, and I will be eagerly diving into those when they drop in June.
Did it come out with any sort of flavor text of like what to expect with it? Does it look like it's going to be just kind of taking the idea of the orange creamsicle thing, or is it going to be harkening back specifically to that Captain Crunch? Because Malto Meal, it is my understanding, is not quite as sugary of a cereal, right?
No, I would say that Malto Meal is the cereal company that historically releases like dupes of more popular cereal brands. And they sell them in the big bags, and they sell them for cheaper typically. It used to be the case where they were like the knockoff Underdog, and then in more recent years they were acquired by Post, the much larger cereal company, and now they're kind of just releasing Post's same product in more of a value-sized line. But this is a rare case of them, not entirely rare, I guess, but a case of them doing something like more creative than their parent brand is, which like I like a lot of Post cereals. Obviously, I like Honey Bunches of Oats a lot, but Post doesn't have as much going for it in terms of newness. It feels like they're just cranking out Fruity Pebbles products left and right, and not really going beyond that. But Malto Meal here with these 3 really catching my eye with the orange dreamsicle, and I'm looking at the news press release that they sent me, and it just says feel like a kid again with orange dreamsicle, a take on a summer classic that will bring some sun to your breakfast table, with an orange slice shaped puffed cereal that combines the taste of vanilla and orange. Each bite will taste like your favorite childhood dessert. So not really a lot to take away from that, but
right.
I have no reason to believe that it won't be as good as the Captain's. I like the slice shaped pieces they have here. I guess it's not specifying on the bag what type of base grain this will be. So
what was do you recall what the Captain Crunch base grain was?
All Captain Crunch, like the treasure chest based cereal or shaped cereals, use like a corn and oat mix, which I'd rather it just be oat, but with the Cap'n cereals, I feel like the coconut oil that they use in making it kind of always like masks out any intrusive base grain flavor anyway. So,
for me, the Captain is a controversial figure for me because when I was growing up, anytime we were in the cereal aisle, and my parents were, I say this word with love, like health freaks. They were very much about, we're not bringing that sugary crap into the house because, when you're eating breakfast, if we're going to buy you something, we want it to have some nutritional value, da 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 da. And like, I get it, but I think over the years I internalized that sort of attitude where even though if someone brought me a bowl of Captain Crunch, I'd be like, hell yeah, let's go. I don't know if I've had Captain Crunch more than a couple times in my entire life, nor could I really tell you what it is like. And I just kind of feel a little bit guilty about that. I'm not going to lie.
I mean, it's never too late to start. I say you got to address that gap in your experience. I would say go with the standard issue Captain Crunch with Crunch Berries.
Okay. Isn't there a peanut butter Captain Crunch?
There is, but it's not my favorite. It's not going to at all compare to the peanut butter Kashi.
Okay. All right. So that I'll take Captain Crunch in its home court with the Crunch Berries then.
Mm-hmm.
I got to do that in the Oat Crunch. That's my homework that I've got. Wow. Okay. Orange Dreamsicle, and I'll keep an eye out too. I'm sure you'll be talking about it on the Empty Bowl. This orange. Does it have like an estimated release date?
Yeah, all three are dropping next month, so June at Walmart.
Oh, my dog's barking. He's letting any noises he sees outside know that they can't trespass here. All 11 pounds of fury. Come here, Nugget. Oh. All right. Cool. Well, thank you for joining us. Is there any other cereal updates or news that or anything else to add about your top 5 before we wrap up here?
Well, I'm still working my way through some new cereals that I just got, so I'm not gonna presume that they might make my top 5 cereals ever, but I'm eyeing this box of Tres Leches Toast Crunch, which some people have told me that it's one of the best Toast Crunches in recent memory, but I will have to see for myself, and you will all hear about it on the next episode of The Empty Bowl.
Incredible. I'm sure, well, I know I'm going to be listening to it as soon the evening that it drops. Once my lamp clicks off and my dog is snuggled up next to me and my neck pillow is on my neck, we are getting into The Empty Bowl. Thank you, Dan, so much for joining us. Do you have any social medias in particular people should follow you on?
Yeah, you can kind of get up-to-the-minute cereal updates on my Twitter at serialouslynet, so CEREALOUSLYNET. I'm hoping that since they're starting to purge Twitter accounts that have not been in use for years, I can finally get the at Serialously account that some dude hasn't touched since 2012.
So sad. But I feel the same way about Lily Contino at Gmail. Like, who is spelling their name like I am and using that email?
Right. And if you want to check out our podcast, you can go to bowl.rest.
Excellent. Awesome, Dan. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, it was a blast, and you're welcome back anytime. But yeah, until then, stay lovely.